It was one of those nights when the rain doesn't just fall, it lingers, clinging to the air like the smell of wet earth that follows you indoors. The old diner on the corner of Miller Street was nearly empty, its neon sign buzzing and flickering, as if even it was too tired to stay awake. I was nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, trying to avoid going home, when I noticed him. At first, Samuel Hawthorne didn't look like the kind of man you'd notice. He sat alone in the farthest booth, his back pressed against the wall, his hands wrapped around a glass of water he didn't drink. His clothes were neat but strange. The cut was old-fashioned, the kind of style you might find in a faded photograph from 50 years ago. The collar of his coat was turned up, shadowing most of his face, but even from across the diner, I could feel his eyes on me. They didn't dart away when I met his gaze, they just stayed there steady, unblinking. The waitress didn't go near him. I watched her refill the coffee of the truck driver in the booth next to mine, but when she got close to Samuel's table, she seemed to remember something she'd forgotten in the kitchen, and turned away. He didn't call after her. He didn't seem to want anything at all, except maybe to watch me. I tried to ignore him, focusing on the sound of rain tapping against the windows and the faint hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. But after a while, the scraping of a chair broke the rhythm of the night. When I looked up, Samuel was standing at my table. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask if he could sit. Instead, he leaned forward just enough that I could smell the faint metallic tang on his coat, like rust or old blood. "You don't belong here," he said. His voice was low, measured, like every word had been weighed before leaving his mouth. Then, after the smallest pause, he added, "Neither do I." I forced a laugh, the kind you give a stranger who's trying to be cryptic but failing. "All right," I said. "And where is it you think I belong?" "When to?" His lips twitched into the smallest hint of a smile, but it wasn't the kind you return. "Somewhere else," he said simply. "Somewhere far away from here. But we don't have time to talk about that now." I looked around, expecting someone to notice this bizarre exchange, but the truck driver was gone. The counter was empty, and the waitress was nowhere to be seen. In fact, the whole diner felt quieter than it had a moment ago. The rain outside muffled as if we were underwater. He glanced toward the front door, and then back at me. "They're already looking," he said, and something about the way he said they made my skin prickle. Before I could respond, he slid into the seat across from me. "Do you remember the summer of 1998? He asked. My throat tightened. "Why?" "Because that was the year you nearly drowned," he said. I felt my breath hitch. That wasn't something I talked about. In fact, outside of my parents, nobody should have known about it. I was 6 years old, at a lake with my family. One second, I was playing in the shallow water, and the next I was sinking, the world above me turning to ripples and sunlight. I still don't know who pulled me out. My parents said they never saw the person. Samuel leaned forward. I was there. I stared at him, searching his face for some kind of joke, some hint that he was just a local who'd overheard an old family story. But there was nothing, just that steady, unsettling gaze. "I pulled you out," he continued, "because I knew you'd be important." The words hung between us, heavy and wrong. I didn't ask what he meant. I couldn't, because somewhere deep in the back of my mind, I realized I had seen his face before. Samuel didn't blink. His eyes held mine like he was waiting for something to register, like he was giving me time to remember. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he couldn't possibly have been there that summer, but the problem was, the longer I stared at him, the harder it was to convince myself I'd never seen him before. His face had that strange, timeless quality. You couldn't quite guess his age. His skin was pale, not in a sickly way, but in the way of someone who never seemed to see the sun. "How do you know about that day?" I finally asked. His smile was slow, as though it hurt him to form it. "Because I saved you. I told you that already, but I didn't just save you from drowning." He leaned in, his voice dropping even lower. until I could feel his breath, cold and faintly sweet, like mint left out too long. I saved you from them. The way he said it sent a shiver crawling up my spine. He didn't explain who they were, but the weight in his tone told me I didn't want to know. I glanced toward the diner's windows. The rain had stopped, but the street outside looked off. The lamps along the sidewalk burned with an odd orange hue, flickering every few seconds. No cars passed, no pedestrians hurried by with umbrellas. It was as if the town itself had fallen into a strange pause. "You don't see it yet," Samuel said softly. "You will." My patience snapped a little. "Look, if this is some kind of weird prank, it's not funny. Who are you?" He tilted his head like he was studying me, not in the way people look at other people, but the way scientists study an insect under glass. "Who I am doesn't matter. Where I'm from, that's harder to explain. Your world doesn't have the words for it, but I can tell you one thing. I am not from here." I laughed once, short and humorless. "Not from here? What, you're an alien?" He didn't laugh. His expression didn't even change. "Not in the way you think, but close enough." A silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. My fingers tightened around my coffee cup, but it was cold now, the liquid inside unmoving, as though it had been sitting there for hours. Samuel's gaze shifted toward the ceiling, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. And then, almost absently, he said, "Do you know what your sky looked like before tonight?" I frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything," he replied, standing so abruptly that the legs of his chair scraped against the tile. He gestured for me to follow him. Against all logic, I did. When we stepped outside, the air smelled different, sharp, metallic, like the seconds before lightning strikes. Samuel pointed upward. The stars were wrong. I knew the constellations well enough. My father used to take me out with a telescope when I was a kid, but now Orion's belt was missing. The North Star wasn't where it should be. Entire clusters seemed rearranged, and in their place were strange patterns I'd never seen before. Samuel's voice was quiet, but every word hit like a weight. "That's the sky from where I come from. It's bleeding through." I stared at him. "Bleeding through what?" His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I thought I saw something in them shift. Not the pupils, not the color, but something deeper, like a ripple moving across still water. "Through the walls that keep our worlds apart," he said. "And when those walls fall, they'll notice you, because you've spoken to me." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "Who will?" Samuel smiled again, a smile without warmth. "You'll see them soon enough." And then, as if on cue, something moved in the corner of my vision, a flicker of shadow, not on the ground, but high up against the street lamps. I turned my head sharply, but there was nothing there. At least, I think there was nothing. The shadows I thought I'd imagined were enough to make me want to go home, lock my doors, and forget I'd ever stepped into that diner. But Samuel wasn't finished with me. In fact, as we stood on that damp, flickering street, I realized he'd barely begun. "You're not going to walk away," he said matter-of-factly, as though reading my mind. "Even if you try, your curiosity will drag you back." "I'm not curious," I lied, taking a half-step backward. His smile said otherwise. "Then I'll give you one more reason to stay." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out something small and square. At first, I thought it was a wallet-sized photograph, but when he held it out to me, I froze. It was a picture of me, not the me standing there in the rain, the me from 15 years ago. My hair was longer, my face rounder with youth. I was wearing a faded blue t-shirt I hadn't owned since high school, but what made my stomach turn wasn't my appearance. It was the fact that the picture showed me sitting on the curb outside this very diner, my head in my hands, crying. The problem was, I had never been here before tonight. I stared at him. "Where did you get this?" "I took it," he said simply, September 9th, 2010. You just received news you didn't know how to process. The phone call from your mother. My mouth went dry. What are you talking about? His voice softened. Your friend Daniel. The accident. You never saw the body, but you know he was gone. My breath caught in my throat. Daniel had been one of my closest friends. He died in a car wreck on an empty road, late at night. It had taken months before I could drive past that stretch of highway without feeling sick. But there was something worse. No one knew I'd gotten the call sitting outside a diner. I'd never told anyone, because I didn't think it mattered. Except it clearly mattered to him. I shook my head, trying to make sense of it. You're lying. You could have looked me up online. You could have. There is no record of this, Samuel interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut. And I'm not telling you to impress you. I'm telling you so you understand why you can't just go home and pretend you never met me. The words pressed down on me like a weight. The street around us felt too still, too silent, as if the world was holding its breath. I don't believe you, I said finally, though my voice lacked conviction. You don't have to, he replied. Belief isn't what keeps you safe. Distance is, and you've already lost that. Before I could demand an explanation, a faint metallic ringing filled the air, like the sound of an old telephone somewhere far away. Samuel stiffened, his eyes darting to the shadows pooling along the edges of the street. They're here, he said, almost to himself, faster than I expected. Who? I whispered. He stepped closer, so close I could see the faint pulse in his throat, slow and steady. Too steady. Don't look directly at them. If you do, they'll know you can see them, and once they know. The sentence trailed off, but I didn't need him to finish. My instincts screamed at me to get away from whatever they were, but my feet wouldn't move. Somewhere down the block, a street lamp popped and went dark. The metallic ringing grew louder, and in the weak orange glow of the remaining lamps, the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, as though something invisible was walking just ahead of them. Samuel's hand closed around my wrist, his grip surprisingly cold. If you want to live through the night, you'll come with me now. I didn't know why I listened. Maybe it was the quiet certainty in his voice, or maybe it was the way the air felt thicker by the second, like we were standing in the middle of a storm that hadn't broken yet. Either way, I followed. Samuel's grip never loosened as we walked. No, hurried, through the wet streets. The puddles reflected the dim orange of the streetlights, but each reflection seemed slightly wrong. I caught glimpses of them bending at impossible angles, as if the water was showing a sky that didn't belong to ours. We passed storefronts with their windows blacked out, no closed signs, no light inside. Even the buzzing neon signs I'd seen earlier were now dead, their tubes dark. Every sound, the patter of rain, the echo of our footsteps, felt unnaturally loud against the heavy stillness pressing down from all sides. When we reached the corner of Holloway and Fifth, Samuel stopped so abruptly I nearly bumped into him. He tilted his head upward, scanning the sky like a man searching for a familiar face in a crowd. Look, he said quietly, pointing with one pale finger. At first I didn't understand. The clouds had parted above us, leaving a stretch of midnight black scattered with stars. But the longer I stared, the more wrong it became. The constellations weren't just shifted from where they should be. They were replaced entirely. Patterns I had never seen before burned coldly in the sky, some forming jagged, unnatural shapes that seemed too deliberate to be random. There was no Orion, no Big Dipper, no North Star. In their place was a cluster of 7 stars forming a crooked spiral, and just above it a long line of lights that pulsed faintly in sequence, almost like breathing. That, Samuel said, still watching me instead of the sky, is where I came from. I tore my gaze from the stars. What do you mean came from? That's just some kind of atmospheric thing. Or satellites. It's not your atmosphere, he said sharply, his eyes narrowing. Your world's walls are thinning. That's why you can see it now. That's why they can find you. The word they came out like a stone dropped into a deep well, heavy, echoing, uncomfortably final. I wanted to tell him he was insane, but the problem was, I couldn't explain what I was seeing any more than he could. And the longer I stared at those alien constellations, the more I felt a subtle vibration in my bones, like the stars themselves were humming. A movement caught my eye, low, by the corner of a building. Something darker than shadow slipped across the brick wall, stretching unnaturally, curling as if sniffing the air. I froze. Samuel followed my gaze, his expression tightening. Don't stare. I'm not. You are. His voice was almost a hiss. They'll know. Come on. He pulled me along again, and I couldn't help but glance at the puddles as we moved. The reflections in them were worse now. In some, the crooked spiral in the sky was closer, much closer, as if the stars were leaning down toward the ground. In others, I thought I saw faint figures moving between the lights, their shapes insect-like and huge. We stopped beneath an old lamp-post, one of the few still working. Samuel let go of my wrist, but didn't step back. There's a place we can go. It's safer there. For now. What happens if they find us? I asked. His jaw worked, like he was weighing the value of the truth. You'll wish they killed you quickly. The cold honesty in his voice sent a shiver through me worse than the damp night air. He looked up at the sky again. We don't have long. The spiral will fade in an hour. Once it does, the border keepers won't need to hide anymore. They'll walk openly, and if you're still outside, a sharp crack split the night, like glass breaking in the distance. Samuel grabbed my arm again. We move now. We ran, and as we did, I realized something. The sound of our footsteps wasn't echoing back the same way anymore. It was as though the streets themselves were starting to swallow the noise. We didn't stop running, until the buildings thinned out, and the streets widened into a deserted stretch near the edge of town. The night air here was sharper, colder, and carried the faint smell of damp soil, and something acrid, almost like burning metal. Samuel finally released my arm and stood still, his head tilted slightly, listening. I bent over, catching my breath. You want to explain what's going on now? Or are you just planning on dragging me through the whole damn town until... Quiet. His voice wasn't harsh, but it carried a weight that shut me up instantly. He turned his head slowly, scanning the shadows between the buildings, as if they were alive. After a long pause he said, "They've noticed you. You don't have much time." My stomach tightened. Noticed me? You keep saying they, like I should know who you're talking about. Who are they? Samuel's gaze shifted to me, his eyes catching just enough light to gleam unnaturally. The border keepers, he said. They guard the places where worlds meet. If someone crosses without permission, like I did, they come for you. And now, because you've spoken to me, because you've seen certain things, they'll come for you too. I laughed nervously, hoping to break the tension. That's ridiculous. You can't just catch something by talking to someone. You've been marked, he interrupted. It doesn't wash off. The way he said it made my skin crawl. Why me? I asked quietly. Samuel stepped closer, his expression almost pitying. Because you've already been close to the threshold once. That's why I pulled you out of the lake when you were a child. You don't remember, but something was already reaching for you that day. If I hadn't been there, he let the thought trail off. I swallowed hard. So what? You've been watching me ever since. Yes, he said simply, without shame. And now the border keepers know I've spoken to you. They can't allow that. It means you've been contaminated with knowledge of another world, and that makes you dangerous to them. My laugh came out shaky. I'm dangerous. I'm not dangerous to anyone. Samuel didn't smile. It doesn't matter. In their eyes, it's not about what you are. It's about what you could become. I rubbed my arms against the cold. And what exactly could I become? He looked past me toward the horizon where the crooked spiral of stars still glowed faintly. A bridge. Before I could ask what he meant, a distant sound rolled over the empty streets, not like footsteps but more like hundreds of tiny claws skittering over stone. The hair on my neck stood up. Samuel's voice dropped to a whisper. "They're closer than I thought." I scanned the shadows, my heart pounding. "What do we do?" He stepped nearer, his tone suddenly urgent. "There's a house. It doesn't exist for most people, but if you follow me you'll see it. Inside, the border keepers can't reach you. Not easily. Not easily." I repeated. "It will hold them off. Long enough to decide if you want to live." His words hit me like ice water. "What do you mean decide?" "You can run," he said. "But if you do, they'll follow you until you break. Or you can come with me, and I'll show you the truth. But if you see what's beyond the threshold, you'll never be able to unsee it." Another sound split the air. A low, rising hum, like machinery buried deep beneath the ground. It was growing louder, and I could feel it in my teeth. Samuel's eyes darted toward a narrow side street. "We have to move. Now." I hesitated for only a second before following him. My mind screamed at me that I was making a mistake. But something deeper, instinct maybe, told me there was no safe choice left. If you want, I can now move to chapter 6, following him through empty streets, where Samuel leads you into a part of town you've never seen before, and reality starts bending in subtle, terrifying ways. Samuel's pace quickened as we slipped through the narrow alleys of the town's oldest district, a place I thought I knew well, but now felt utterly foreign. The streetlights here were weak and sputtering, casting long, jittery shadows that twisted and danced like living things. Every step echoed far too loudly, as if the buildings themselves were holding their breath and listening. The air was thick with dampness, and a faint, unsettling smell of something burnt and metallic, like scorched iron mixed with cold smoke. My heart hammered so loudly in my chest that I was sure Samuel could hear it, but he seemed completely unfazed, his eyes fixed straight ahead, scanning the darkness as though expecting something to jump out at any moment. We passed boarded-up storefronts with faded signs, and a crumbling brick church, whose stained glass windows were shattered, the shards glittering like jagged stars in the dim light. I wanted to ask where we were going, but the words stuck in my throat. "Why are we here?" I finally managed to whisper. Samuel didn't answer at first. Then, without slowing down, he said, "This part of town, it's a boundary zone, a place where the walls between worlds are thin. Most people avoid it. They don't see what lurks just beneath the surface." A chill ran down my spine. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling only grew stronger with every step. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, deeper, pooling around corners like dark water waiting to swallow me whole. Suddenly, a distant noise shattered the silence, a soft scraping sound, like nails on stone. I froze. Samuel's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. "They're close," he said quietly. I wanted to ask who they were again, but something told me now was not the time. Instead, I swallowed my fear and kept moving, following Samuel as he led me down an alley that twisted sharply to the left. The walls here were covered in strange symbols, scratches and markings etched deep into the brick. Some looked like letters, others like stars and spirals, and a few resembled eyes watching from the darkness. Samuel stopped in front of a narrow door that looked far too new for the rest of the building. It was black, with no handle or keyhole, only a faint glow outlining its edges. "This is it," he said. "The door most people never see." I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the cold surface. It felt like glass, but solid. As I pressed, the door shimmered, and slowly slid open, revealing a stairway that spiraled downward into darkness. A rush of cold air spilled out, carrying whispers that sounded like voices from another time. I wanted to step back, but Samuel's hand was firm on my shoulder. "You don't have to go in," he said. "But if you want to survive the night, you'll follow me." The choice was clear: stay and face whatever was out there, or descend into a place that might be even worse. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. The stairwell seemed to swallow the light from the doorway as I descended, the walls narrowing around me until it felt like I was moving through a tunnel carved from shadows. The faint glow Samuel mentioned faded quickly, leaving only the cold air brushing past my skin and the whispering voices trailing behind us like ghosts. At the bottom, we stepped into a room that didn't make sense. The floor was uneven, old wood that creaked beneath my feet, but the walls were pristine, smooth, and impossibly white, like freshly polished marble. It was as if the house existed out of time, refusing to age or decay. Samuel moved ahead, his footsteps silent, guiding me deeper into the labyrinth. The air smelled faintly of dust, and something else, something metallic and distant, like electricity humming just beyond perception. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but every sound seemed amplified. The scrape of my shoes on the wood, the soft thud of Samuel's footsteps, and the low hum that filled the room like a pulse. "Where are we?" I whispered. "This place is a gateway," Samuel said quietly. "But it's not just a door, it's a sanctuary, or a trap. For most it doesn't exist, but for those like us, it's a refuge from what hunts us outside." The walls suddenly rippled, like a heat haze on a summer's day, and for a moment I saw flickers of impossible places, cities glowing with strange lights, skies painted with alien stars, and creatures that defied description. My heart pounded. How is this possible? Samuel's eyes were dark, distant, because this house stands between worlds. It's where reality bends. A heavy silence fell. Then he turned to me, voice low but firm. "You need to understand. Whatever you choose now, there's no going back. The world you knew is already slipping away. The world you knew is already slipping away." The moment I stepped fully inside the house, a cold weight settled over me, heavier than any chill from the damp night outside. The air felt thick, like it was folding around me, compressing and expanding in rhythms I couldn't predict. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing heart. The walls glowed faintly now, faint veins of light pulsing beneath their surface like a heartbeat. I could almost feel in my chest. Every surface seemed to hum with energy, strange, electric, alive. Samuel moved ahead, as if the house itself obeyed his silent command. The familiar rules of the world, physics, time, even gravity, seemed to blur here. Shadows flickered where there should have been none, and distant sounds echoed from places I couldn't see. I reached out to steady myself on the wall, but my fingers brushed against a surface warmer than I expected, almost soft to the touch. It rippled like water, and for a terrifying second, I thought the wall was breathing. "Don't look at the mirrors," Samuel said suddenly, his voice sharp, cutting through the thick silence. I turned, catching sight of a tall mirror hanging crookedly on one wall. Its surface was clouded, but as I looked closer, I saw something move inside it, a flicker of a face, not mine, watching from just beyond the glass. My breath caught. "What is that?" "Not everything here is what it seems," Samuel said. "Some things try to reach through." The house groaned softly, and the walls seemed to pulse faster. Time felt elastic. Seconds stretched into minutes. Minutes folded into seconds. I had no idea how long we wandered through the twisting corridors, each turn leading deeper into the unknown. At one point, we came to a door marked with symbols I didn't recognize, spirals and lines that seemed to move when I blinked. Samuel hesitated before opening it. Inside was a small room, filled with old books and strange artifacts, some glowing faintly, others covered in dust, thick enough to choke on. Samuel picked up a book, its cover made of a material that looked like cracked stone but felt unnervingly warm. "Here," he said, "this holds part of the truth you need to know. But be careful, knowledge here comes at a price." I nodded, feeling the weight of the house settle deeper in my bones. The rules were changing, and I wasn't sure if I was ready. The dusty book Samuel handed me felt oddly heavy in my hands, as if it contained more than just words. I ran my fingers over its cracked cover, feeling a subtle vibration beneath my touch, like a heartbeat trapped inside stone. But then something else caught my eye. Leaning against the far wall was a faded photograph in a frame thick with dust. Curious, I wiped it clean with the sleeve of my jacket. What I saw froze me in place. The photograph showed Samuel, or someone who looked exactly like him, standing beside my grandparents. The picture was old, sepia-toned, with edges curled from age. But what terrified me was that Samuel's face hadn't changed at all. No wrinkles, no signs of aging, just the same pale, intense gaze I'd seen that night at the diner. I blinked, thinking maybe it was some kind of trick of the light. But no, there he was, standing in my family's past, a figure who didn't belong. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Samuel's expression darkened. "This house keeps many secrets. It collects moments that have slipped through time's cracks. But why? Why are you in my family's history?" He looked away, then back at me, eyes cold and serious. "Because I've been here longer than you realize, longer than you could understand." My mind reeled. How could someone be a part of my family's story, yet remain a stranger? And what did that mean for everything I thought I knew about my own life? Before I could ask more, a sudden noise echoed through the house, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on wood. The temperature dropped sharply, and the light flickered. Samuel's gaze hardened. "They're closer than ever. We don't have much time." I forced myself to look away from the photograph, swallowing the unease knotting my stomach. The house seemed to pulse with anticipation, like it was alive and waiting for something. The tapping noise grew louder, echoing through the halls like a heartbeat racing out of control. My skin prickled as the air around us thickened, making it harder to breathe. Samuel's eyes darted toward the shadows, his expression darkening with every passing second. "We don't have much time," he whispered. "They're here." I strained my eyes, searching the dim corners of the room. At first there was nothing but silence and darkness. But then, a movement, a shadow, shifting unnaturally along the walls too fluid to be cast by any light source. It slithered and stretched, crawling like smoke across the surfaces, shaping itself into forms that made my blood run cold. Eyes, many of them, flickered in that darkness, reflecting a light I couldn't place. They weren't human. They weren't anything I'd ever seen. "They're called border keepers," Samuel said, his voice barely audible. "Guardians of the thresholds between worlds. They hunt anyone who crosses without their permission." A cold dread settled over me. "Why are they after me?" "Because you've seen too much," he replied. "Because the walls between our worlds are breaking down, and you're caught in the middle." The shadows moved closer, tendrils reaching out like desperate fingers. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Samuel grabbed my hand, pulling me toward a narrow door at the far end of the room. "This way. Hurry." We slipped through the doorway just as the shadows lunged forward, their forms dissipating against the threshold like smoke hitting fire. Breathless, I looked back at the empty room, the silence now heavier than ever. "Who are they really?" I asked, voice trembling. Samuel's face was grim. "More than guardians. They're hunters, judges, and executioners, and they don't tolerate trespassers." I swallowed hard, knowing my life had changed forever. After escaping the shadows, Samuel led me down a narrow corridor that seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The air grew thicker, the walls closing in as we approached a heavy door marked with cryptic symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. He produced an old iron key from his coat pocket and unlocked it with a soft click. Inside was a circular room, its floor carved with intricate patterns and strange runes burned into the wood. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and something metallic like cold steel. "This is where they mark the boundaries," Samuel explained, where the worlds overlap, and where the thin veil between realities can be pierced. I stepped cautiously inside, feeling a chill as I crossed the threshold. The symbols beneath my feet seemed to shimmer faintly, as if alive. "What happens here?" I asked. "Rituals," he said. "Old magic. Or perhaps science we don't understand. This place holds the coordinates, the map to where I come from." My eyes darted around the room, taking in the strange carvings and symbols that seemed to pulse softly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Why show me this?" I whispered. "Because you need to understand what you're up against," Samuel replied. "And because you're more involved than you think." Suddenly, the symbols flared brightly, and a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the floor and into my bones. I swallowed hard, realizing this was no ordinary place. It was a gateway, and whatever lay beyond it was waiting. The hum in the ritual room grew louder, vibrating through my body, like a storm gathering strength. Samuel's eyes were fixed on the glowing runes beneath our feet, his jaw tight with concentration. "This is the moment," he said. "The threshold is opening. You have to decide. Will you step through, or will you turn away and live in ignorance?" I swallowed hard, heart hammering in my chest. The weight of everything, the lies, the secrets, the shadows pressed down on me. I realized I'd already lost the chance to go back to my old life. "What happens if I go through?" I asked, voice barely steady. "You see the truth," Samuel said, "the world beyond your own, but it changes you, forever, and if I don't—" He looked at me with a sad, tired expression. "They'll come for you anyway, because you've crossed the line just by knowing." The room's light flared brighter, and I felt the air thicken as if reality itself was bending. Somewhere far away, a low roar echoed, shaking the very ground beneath us. I took a deep breath, knowing this was the point of no return. I stepped forward. The moment I crossed the glowing circle etched into the floor, the world around me shifted, like waking from a dream, and finding everything just slightly wrong. Colors deepened, shadows stretched longer, and the air buzzed with an electric charge that prickled my skin. Samuel's voice echoed beside me, distant yet clear. "This is where your reality and mine blur, where the worlds touch." I looked around and saw a landscape unlike anything I'd ever known. The sky above was a swirl of dark purples and blues, pierced by stars arranged in impossible patterns, the same crooked spiral I'd seen earlier. Strange shapes moved in the distance, creatures that seemed to shimmer between solidity and smoke. "Where are we?" I whispered. "Home," Samuel said simply. But this home was a place of contradictions, beauty and terror intertwined. The air smelled of ozone and burning wood, while a cold wind whispered secrets I couldn't understand. I felt a pull, as if unseen threads tugged at my mind, urging me to explore, to uncover what this place really was. Yet a voice inside warned me, "Danger lurks here." Samuel turned to me, his eyes steady. "You're not just a visitor anymore. You belong here now, whether you want to or not." A sudden, distant roar shattered the uneasy calm. The border keepers were coming. I swallowed my fear, gripping Samuel's arm. "What now?" He nodded toward the horizon, where shadows gathered like a storm ready to break. "Now, we prepare." As the shadows thickened on the horizon, Samuel led me toward a structure that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light. It was an ancient building, its stones covered in moss and strange carvings that glowed faintly in the dark. The closer we got, the heavier the air became, as if the weight of centuries pressed down on us. Inside, the walls were lined with murals depicting scenes I couldn't fully comprehend, figures walking between worlds, battles fought in twilight realms, and faces twisted in terror and awe. Among them, one image caught my eye, a figure standing in the same spot I was now, facing an enormous shadowy beast with eyes like burning coals. "Who is that?" I asked. Samuel's gaze darkened. "That's the warning. From the past, a reminder that this fight has been going on far longer than you think. He reached into his coat and pulled out a faded journal. This belonged to someone who made the crossing before you, someone who tried to stop the border keepers but failed. I flipped through the brittle pages, reading hastily scrawled notes about forbidden knowledge, fleeting glimpses of other worlds, and desperate warnings. It says here that knowledge is both power and curse, I murmured. That once you see beyond, you can't forget. Samuel nodded. Exactly. And now, because you've crossed, you carry that burden. Sudden roar echoed nearby, shaking the walls. They're coming, Samuel said, urgency creeping into his voice. I looked at him, fear twisting in my gut. What happens now? We prepare, he said grimly, because the real fight begins tonight. The ancient hall seemed to pulse with a living energy, as we gathered what little weapons and charms Samuel carried, strange artifacts that felt cold and heavy in my hands. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal, carrying with it the distant sounds of movement, whispers growing louder, sharper. Samuel's voice was steady, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. They don't come for simple trespassers, they come for those who threaten the fragile balance. And now, you're one of those threats. We moved to a narrow window where I could see shadows gathering, dark shapes shifting and coalescing in the twilight beyond the ancient stone walls. I swallowed my fear as the first low growls broke the silence, growing closer, more menacing. They're hunting, Samuel said. And we're bait. My hands trembled as I gripped a small talisman Samuel handed me, etched with symbols that seemed to glow faintly. What does this do? I asked. It's a ward, he said. It won't stop them forever, but it can slow them down. Suddenly, the heavy wooden door shook violently, as if something immense was pounding on the other side. The walls seemed to close in, shadows twisting and reaching through cracks like dark fingers. Samuel's face hardened. Get ready. This is just the beginning. As the door burst open with a deafening crash, I braced myself, heart racing, knowing there was no turning back. The door exploded inward, splinters flying like shards of glass. Darkness flooded the room, alive and crawling, tendrils reaching out like desperate hands. The temperature plunged, and the air tasted metallic, sharp and biting. I stood frozen for a moment, heart hammering, until Samuel grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a corner shadowed from the room's center. They're here, he said through gritted teeth. Focus on the talisman, keep it glowing. I clenched the talisman, feeling its faint warmth pulse against my palm. Around us, the shadows shifted, coalescing into forms, hulking shapes with glowing eyes and jagged limbs that seemed carved from nightmare. The creatures hissed and snarled, their voices a chilling chorus of whispers and growls that echoed in my mind. Samuel chanted softly, in a language I didn't understand, his voice steady but urgent. The talisman's glow brightened, pushing back the darkness inch by inch. But one shadow lunged forward, faster than I could react, its claws scraping the floor mere inches from my face. I slammed the talisman against the floor, and a burst of light erupted, throwing the creature back with a shriek that echoed through the chamber. The battle had begun, and survival depended on every moment, every breath, every heartbeat. The light from the talisman flickered, wavering as more shadows pressed in from every side. My lungs burned with each shallow breath, adrenaline flooding my veins. But the terror didn't fade, it only sharpened. Samuel's chant grew louder, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of darkness. Hold fast, he urged. Knowledge is power, but it demands a price. I glanced around the room, noticing for the first time the strange symbols carved into the walls glowing faintly, pulsing with the same rhythm as the talisman. It was like the entire space was alive, feeding on fear, on hope, on every moment that passed. Suddenly, a cold hand brushed my shoulder. I spun around, but no one was there. Don't lose focus, Samuel warned, eyes flashing with urgency. The border keepers can invade your mind, twist your thoughts, make you doubt everything. I swallowed hard, fighting the creeping fog of despair threatening to swallow me whole. The shadows whispered terrible lies, memories twisted into nightmares. But I clung to the talisman's glow, a fragile lifeline. Then Samuel's voice broke through, stronger than before. Remember why you're here. Remember what you've seen. With renewed strength, I tightened my grip on the talisman and met the advancing darkness head on. The price of knowledge was steep, but it was one I was willing to pay. The battle raged on, shadows clawing at every inch of space, their whispers growing into frantic screams. But amid the chaos, something shifted. The talisman's light flared bright, casting long, sharp shadows that danced on the walls, revealing glimpses of another world bleeding through the cracks. I saw twisted landscapes, jagged mountains that glowed faintly, skies streaked with strange colors I couldn't name. Strange creatures roamed these vistas, some towering, others small and darting like shadows themselves. Samuel's voice was urgent, pulling me back from the edge of that terrifying vision. Don't look too long, he warned. That glimpse can consume you. But I couldn't tear my eyes away. There was a terrible beauty there, but beneath it all, a deep, endless hunger, as if that world was alive and waiting to reach in. The shadows howled in fury, sensing my distraction. One lunged, and I barely dodged, heart pounding in my throat. Samuel caught my arm. Focus, you're stronger than this. Breathing hard, I forced myself back to the fight, but the memory of that glimpse haunted me, a reminder that the border between worlds was thinner than I ever imagined. The battle's chaos raged around us, but something in Samuel's eyes had changed. A flicker of doubt, or maybe fear. As we pressed on, he finally stopped, pulling me into a small alcove away from the snarling shadows. There's something I haven't told you, he said, voice low. Something you need to know before this ends. I looked at him, heart hammering. What is it? He hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small battered box. This belonged to my family, a legacy passed down through generations. He opened it carefully, revealing an old cracked mirror no bigger than my palm. But as I looked into it, the reflection was not my own. Instead, it showed flickering images, places I'd never seen, faces I didn't recognize, and a swirling vortex of shadow. This mirror, Samuel explained, is a key, a bridge. It's how the border keepers track those who cross worlds. I shivered. Why didn't you tell me? Because knowing this changes everything. It means you're not just caught in the middle, you're the target. The shadows pressed closer, their whispers growing frantic. Samuel's voice was steady but grim. We have to keep moving. They're coming for us. The air crackled with tension as Samuel and I moved through the twisting corridors of the house, clutching the mirror tightly. The border keeper's growls echoed behind us, growing louder, closer. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows thickening like a living fog determined to consume everything. I could feel the weight of what I carried, that small cracked mirror, a key to worlds both terrifying and unknown. It was strange to think that something so fragile could hold such power. Samuel's voice was steady, but urgent. This is where it ends, for now. We reached a chamber bathed in pale blue light, a circle etched deeply into the floor. Samuel placed the mirror in its center. The runes carved around the circle began to glow, pulsing in rhythm with the mirror's faint shimmer. Stand back, he said. The room vibrated as a portal opened, a swirling gateway of light and shadow, a doorway to the worlds beyond. Through it I could glimpse endless skies streaked with strange colors, and hear whispers of voices from places I couldn't begin to imagine. The border keepers burst into the chamber, their forms writhing and shifting, eyes blazing with fury. Samuel raised his hands, chanting in that ancient language, the runes flaring brighter and brighter. The shadows lunged, but the portal's light cut through them like a blade. One by one they shrieked and dissolved into nothingness. As the last shadow vanished, Samuel turned to me. "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning of a war that's been raging far longer than you know." I nodded, breathless but alive. The knowledge I carried was a burden, but also a weapon. "Are you ready?" he asked. I swallowed hard, steeling myself. I have to be. Together, we stepped through the portal into the unknown.